Māori Trade Training scheme in New Zealand. My perspective is that the hāhi wetere ana, in brackets Methodist Church, hāhi rātana, and certain ngaitahu kaumātua of the time played a very, very leading role in that establishment, particularly with the trade training scheme that initially commenced at Rehua. To qualify that statement, one needs to briefly look at the relationship between the hāhi wetere ana and the hāhi rātana, because they have been close ever since Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Rātana and the Mōrehu of the time were wishing to set up a religious body, hāhi rātana. To do that, they needed an endorsement from an existing hāhi, and that came through in the manner of Father Seymour of the Waikato Maori mission, who signed the required document and made rātana an established church, established hāhi. The bond between the two has never diminished, and that being so, I was told in 1949, 3 kaumātuas from Te Waipounamu went to Tūranga Waiwai Ngaruahia to tautoko the hāhi rātana in certain taki that were on the table at that time. Those 3 gentlemen were Reverend Wera Couch from Rāpaki, Mr. Joe Moss, stationed in Wellington, but in whakapapa terms was from Ōtautahi, Murihiku, Joseph Wallingford Moss, and the Reverend Forkingham, who was about to take position as the superintendent of the Methodist Central Mission Christchurch. They went to the hui in 1949. They were impressed with the work of Princess Te Puia Herangi Srank, in that she had acquired a building at 4 Bryce Street, Hamilton, and named it Te Rāhui Wahine. And Te Puia had done this with her concern for the young Maori girls coming into Hamilton with produce for the Maori Battalion, 28th Maori Battalion. They would come in with kai, boxes of kai, Anzac biscuits, I recall that being said. That's a relic from World War I. Cakes, clothing, kākahu, and pack them up and send them over to the Mediterranean. When that completed, they'd find a park and sleep under hedges and trees. And Te Puia, that's why she endeavoured and succeeded in purchasing 4 Bryce Street. It's still there. It's owned now by the Tainui Trust Board, and it still has a role to play. The 3 men I mentioned returned to Christchurch and decided what Te Puia had done, they'll do the same in Christchurch, which was a remarkable thought, because the population, Maori-wise, of Christchurch was nothing like Hamilton and the Waikato. You could count families on one hand. So they purchased a property first at 238 Stanmore Road and acquired girls. I mentioned Mere Taufare, who later became Mrs. Bill Morgan, Whare Tutu Solomon and her sister Whare Remu from Kaikoura, with Whare Tutu's little child called Sue Reed, whose father was overseas in the war. and who later in life became Mrs. Tuhakaraina, and you had Rita Rangi, later Mrs. Wikiriwhi, and others from Kaikoura of the Beaton Morel line. They were looked after by Joseph Moss, who I mentioned earlier, and his wife. She was a deaconess of the Hāhi Weteriana, Deaconess Ropata, who was known as Taka Moss. She was part of the Ellison whānau. And after a year, they got together and thought, well, really, it's not working as we wanted it to. So those three gentlemen decided to go to Mahia Peninsula to speak to the kaumātua of Ngāti Pāhauwera, also Runga Whakata, Ngāta Manuhiri, and ask the old people for their young boys to come to Christchurch to learn one of three trades offering at the time: carpentry, painting, mechanics. The boys came. This would have been approximately 1951, 52. It was the same time that New Zealand after World War II was having an awakening of things Māori, because Whenakupa with the Māori Women's Welfare League had just been formed, and I recall they were lobbying for the Maori Land Court to be based in Christchurch rather than Wellington, so people would have easier access from the Bluff or Hokitika. And this scheme, this thought of the old people was beautiful at that time. The old people up in Hawke's Bay, Mahia, agreed, and they negotiated with the lady welfare officer of that time was Lena Manuel, and whānau approved their boy coming south. And I think of names like Wainahu, Thompson, Wilson, Carr, McGregor, Tipu, Mackenzie, Stewart, which is the same as Huata, McRoberts, and they came. By this time, the little group committee had decided we'll sell Stanmore Road, and they acquired the premise of what we now know as Rehua in Springfield Road. It all looks like Rehua, and it is, but there's 8 separate titles. And the boys came initially from Mahia in that vicinity, and they all went to Polytech. Those men I mentioned had great contacts. They embraced other kaumātua in Canterbury, and I'm referring to Ricky Ellison, Joe Karetai, Whitu Pitama, that were able to help, because through there Ricky was related, his cousin had married Rangi Royal, and Rangi Royal was the senior Maori welfare officer for New Zealand, and he was very much in favour of this basic plan. I don't think they realised how big it would grow. So for about 10 years they provided that work, supported by the welfare officers based in Wellington, and the government certainly showed interest 10, 11 years later, because then in around about 1965, 66, they opened Te Kaihanga at Hanson's Lane, Riccarton, and also Sylvia Park in Auckland, Te Rāhui Tāne in Hamilton, and Trentham at Upper Hutt. And by this time, with the government involvement, further trades were now being embraced. And boys mostly in the North Island initially, but it started to cover the whole country, getting young Maori boys into Auckland, Hamilton, Upper Hutt, Christchurch to learn a trade. I came south in the early 60s when, through the women's welfare lobbying, the Maori Land Court was set up in Te Waipounamu, and I acquired the position of senior court clerk at that time, and I was with Father Seymour and Sister Heaney at Te Rahuitane where I lived, and they wrote down to those gentlemen and said, look, Terry's with us, he's one of ours, he's got nowhere to stay, can you give guidance? And they replied, Terry can stay with us at Rehua. So I arrived. I remember it quite clearly. We slept in little army barracks out on the Marae. Myself, my mate at that time was Graham Rako from Bay of Plenty. And I can think of, it was a lovely experience. We were all as one big happy family doing things together. And in those days there was no television, there was the radio, your phone was toll barred. The most popular person of the day was the mailman, and you'd see him biking up the road with a big bundle of letters from everyone's nanny ma, nanny pa, mum and dad, cousins, and that was your communication with home. Because Christchurch was different to Auckland, Hamilton and Wellington because of Cook Strait. You just couldn't get on a bus and go home. You've got Cook Strait to contend with. And I do remember a lot of homesickness, those first, the intake on their first year. The big meal of the week, we had lovely, lovely meals at Rehua. They were prepared and guided by the hāhi weteriana who came from Taranaki. There's a church, Rangiatea, up in New Plymouth, and Mrs. Keenan and her sister, Mrs. Tracy Megan, and their sister, Judy Whippety, all came nara te maru o te hāhi weteriana to work at Rehua. And the boys look forward to that Sunday meal, that roast, which I often tell people, with mint peas and roast kumara and potatoes and carrots and pumpkin, and then followed up by apple crumble with ice cream seeping through. It's beautiful. You don't have that now because we watch TV and you just get a kai off the road, and life is so different. But after lunch, the boys went down to the square, which is what you did, just to see action in some way, and the Pākehā community of Christchurch would come in from the suburbs specifically to meet and see a Maori boy, because they hadn't seen Maori boys before. I find that I was part of that scene. I'm not saying I was the Maori boy, I wasn't, but I was there. And it was really wonderful, and people would say, oh look, Rangi, next Sunday I'll meet you in the square and I'll take you home for tea. And that's when Rangi and others would meet up with Charlotte and Sophie and Christina, the daughters of their host, which ultimately became marriages. And I know for sure that the trade trainee scheme that those people I've mentioned instigated at that point of time changed the face of Christchurch forever. I definitely know that. Now those old boys, those first intake, are in their 70s. Their parents, their granddads, their even great-granddads, and those children, descendants, are still here. Some have gone home, some are in Australia and further afield, Britain, but there's still that bond that remains, particularly at Tangihanga. You find they all come home because everyone's brother, everyone's bro.